Right, morning everybody. So Jenny just asked me really if I'd do a bit of a review of the year for you, and obviously I'll also thank you for your contributions to what has been a challenging but successful year for us all, I think. So just looking back, I'm just thinking back to last summer when we set our improvement priorities for this year, and the things we were focusing on at that time was, first of all, the review of the curriculum. So we did the start of this review process last summer. We reviewed the whole of our curriculum in light of the ITT core content framework, the new Ofsted framework for ITE, and also we were also looking at decolonisation and diversification of our curriculum, and also how we delivered the curriculum given COVID restrictions. So there was a big review in which we checked that we were covering all of the learn that aspects of the core content framework. We wrote new sessions at that time and integrated them into the curriculum for this year. We were looking very much at support for academics on remote and blended delivery. So we were expecting to be back in Charles Street in September, and obviously we weren't, and there was a period of very rapid learning by the team in terms of how to deliver remotely rather than face to face, and we went through various platforms, WebEx, Zoom, Blackboard Collaborate, and I think that the team did really well in adjusting to that. I think we got to a certain level of competence with our remote delivery and then sort of plateaued. So I think we're ready for the next push on that now. Something that was department-wide was the review of tracking of progress against QTS and the removal of the grading, the numbers, to a more supportive, progressive approach across the year. From my perspective, I think that's been really successful, and I think it's particularly in a year when things weren't normal, those descriptors gave us a little bit more leeway in terms of interpretation rather than that very rigid 1, 2, 3, 4 system. So I think we did have to adjust and amend because of the context that we were in this year, but certainly I see that as a positive move forward. On our improvement priorities, again, this is more all department-wide probably rather than just secondary PG, was that development of high-quality mentors and that input into mentor training. Jenny very much is the lead on this in secondary. And I know there's the sort of 3-tier approach in terms of the online mentor training, but I know Jenny's team have done lots of other mentor training, initial training, at elbow training, etc. during the year. Another thing on our priority list was the review of student experience from application to induction. We had a lot of problems at the beginning of last year, a lot of problems getting students enrolled, getting access to systems, getting access to timetable, and the student administrative support team and student support have looked very carefully at those processes for the beginning of next year, and we're hoping that things will be a lot smoother there. So there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes on that. And one other thing we did have on our improvement priorities was to investigate new flexible placement models. For a number of years, maths have sort of had a model where a group of trainees, 4 trainees, go into one department in one school and work in a slightly different way to the traditional one mentor, one trainee model. With what happens during the year in terms of schools going in and out of lockdown, the priority became, can we place our trainees rather than looking more creatively at placement models. Hopefully, both with the introduction of the market review and maybe a little bit more stability next year, we might be able to go back to looking more creatively at placement. So they were the things we were aiming at. But actually, a lot of our year became about responding to COVID and responding to schools going in and out of placement, and also to our own context. So it became apparent in summer that it wasn't going to be business as usual in September, and we spent some of summer replanning semester one with our school partners, putting in a later start to placement, replanning the beginning of the academic year to allow placement schools to adjust to the new context of COVID. So our feeling was you need a little bit of time settling in with yourselves and your pupils before you then have responsibility for our trainees. So that did involve, rescheduling, retimetabling, looking again at that curriculum at the beginning of the year. Some of our school direct trainees did get into school straight away, and that was absolutely fantastic. And those schools, hats off to you for dealing with your trainees and that unusual beginning of the year as well. We also, another adjustment for COVID was the removal of some of our enrichment placements, which taking students out of their main school, putting them into another school context for a day or a few days, just didn't feel appropriate this year with the risks and the chances of perhaps cross-contamination there. So again, it'd be great to get those placements up and running again for next year. Just the success there, semester one, we had 440 trainees to place. Half of those were school direct, so obviously those placements were done by school direct partners. But at the start, normal start of placement, we'd placed 440 trainees. 5 trainees did do a remote placement from September to Christmas, and 2 trainees converted to a remote delivery a few weeks into placement. But if you look broadly across the country, that's incredible, really, that we managed to get all of those trainees into placements, and that is down to the people in this room. We know that schools had a lot to deal with this year, and you could have turned around and said, no, we don't want trainees this year, and you didn't. So I'm really, really grateful. It's very unusual. I go to meetings with other HEIs, and a lot of trainees weren't placed before Christmas or were on remote placements before Christmas. So that was a real success, I think, of this partnership. In semester 2, again, the schools went into lockdown. Schools were told on January the 4th that you were going into lockdown. The core trainees were due out on placement a week or so after that. I think it was 2 weeks after that they were due out on placement. I was really worried at that point that schools would say, well, we're in lockdown, we're dealing with remote teaching, how can we deal with your trainees as well? And again, you took the trainees and you worked with them, and they had a really interesting and useful experience being part of that context in schools when they were teaching remotely or supporting you while you were teaching remotely. And I think really rose to the challenge there. There was a period of sort of rapid work here because our assignment 2 didn't fit with remote placement. So we rewrote the brief for assignment 2. Thank you, Pat, who's in the room, who did all the work for that. And then we also adapted the professional studies tasks so that they would be relevant to a face-to-face or remote context. Some of the things I think that worked well during that period of rapid change, both in schools and at the university, was that regular communication to trainees, senior mentor coordinators and LITEX, and Jenny's keeping in touch meetings were really useful, both in terms of us communicating changes that were happening at university, but also getting your opinion on what was going out there and what our expectations could be of the trainees, and that sort of two-way communication has been really, really helpful this year. We did put in a lot of additional student voice meetings, so meetings with the student reps, so that we could keep a check on how they were doing and how any changes we imposed, the impact of that on them. there's a lot of flurry of activity around assignment 2, but we got there in the end, and they actually did really well on that assignment as well. So again, other changes, we did virtual moderation meetings for SBT1 and SBT2. Some schools have questioned that, and just to explain the reason for doing that really was when we asked schools about going in physically to do visits, some schools were very happy with that, some weren't. When we asked about recording lessons or being in and watching remotely in a classroom, some schools were really happy with that and some weren't. So we really needed a process that would work for every single student. So for SBT2 in particular, we went to this 3-way moderation meeting, but any student who was in danger of failing, so any student on a SIP 2, there was a physical visit to school and there was a face-to-face observation. So I suppose really where that decision on pass and fail was crucial, we ensured that somebody got into school. And sometimes these decisions are not popular about what we're doing, but it's trying to get some sort of consistency across 440 trainees in, maybe 200 and odd schools. Okay, so just moving on to the good bits then. So the outcomes, despite the year that it's been, 97% of trainees were recommended for QTS at the end of the course. Okay, so 389 out of 399 were recommended for QTS. 10 trainees weren't recommended for QTS and have been offered an extension placement between September and December. And of that, 8 of the ones not recommended were provider-led and 2 was school direct. So again, well done, school direct. And our 8 provider-led trainees, we will continue to support them and the school direct trainees into that extension placement, and hopefully they will achieve QTS by Christmas. Moving on, again, we do an exit survey every year. I'm absolutely astounded by the outcomes of this exit survey. Again, given the year and the challenge that we've had, overall, 97% of all secondary PGCE trainees judge their training to be good or very good, and that's a response rate of 90% as well. School direct, oh my goodness me, there was one trainee who judged their training to be satisfactory and everybody else judged their training to be good or very good. 74% judged their training to be very good. That's during a national pandemic when all the teachers have been under immense stress and challenges. So just well done to all of you out there in school. That's absolutely fantastic. I was over the moon when I read those results. Okay, so just moving on, again, slight Achilles heel for us, as it always has been, withdrawal rates. After a gradual reduction over the last couple of years, the withdrawal rate has risen to 10%. So we lost about 40 students along the way this year. And I'm sure we know lots of the reasons for that. There was a bulge in recruitment. I think there were a lot of young people coming to the end of the degrees and going, we're in a national pandemic, there's no jobs, I'll apply for teaching. And then actually the realisation when they've got into it that it wasn't for them and it wasn't what they expected. So we lost about 20 trainees before Christmas once they were out there in schools. I think there were some who'd been a little bit strategic and applied for training courses and were applying for other jobs at the same time. But again, that's something that we do need to keep our eye on. If we recruit people, we really do want them to succeed and achieve QTS. So again, David mentioned this because it happened yesterday. We had this week on, I can't remember which day of the week it was. Yeah, on Wednesday we had a big course and module review in which all our external examiners come and join us and talk about the successes of our courses and also They are true critical friends. They do point out what needs doing, and they do point out when things are wrong, aren't right. And then we had our departmental assessment board yesterday, and the chief external examiner was incredibly complimentary about what she'd seen, congratulating the trainees for their progress and success during what's been a really difficult year. She commented on the commitment and creativity of the professionals working with the students, and that should be acknowledged beyond the teacher education department. She observed, she spoke to trainees, music trainees actually, and their mentors, and she talked about the excellent collaboration between schools and the university, and also the excellent collaboration between mentors and trainees. I mentioned the quality of the dialogue and discussions that were observed between mentors, trainees and tutors during those final moderation visits. And she actually did say that perhaps that three-way meeting had allowed that quality of dialogue and discussion, and that she saw that degree of collaboration that perhaps she hadn't seen when we're looking at the more traditional going out and observing a lesson and giving feedback. There was and I found this when I did those meetings, that real sense of support between the trainees and mentors that I spoke to. So that's great to see. So really difficult year. I think we've achieved an amazing amount in that year. I think everybody is absolutely shattered at this point and ready for a rest. The outcomes, as I say, in that exit survey, they don't just happen. That's due to continual commitment and hard work of the people in this partnership, and that also, I think that collaboration and dialogue. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you, and I'm going to pass back over to Jenny.
Okay, thanks.